All right, so CEOs without suits. Why are we not wearing suits? Because, well, it's obvious we are home quarantined, and I had to put on a jacket. I haven't worn a jacket in like a week, but I put one on, and I got a friend of mine, Marc Kitay, from a partner from the law firm in Toronto, Whitten and Lublin. Yes, partner. Now I've known Marc for a long time, and let me give you a quick introduction to Marc. We share the common experience of both being bullied in Jewish summer camp by Seth Rogen. And jokes on Seth Rogen, we get to be important enough to have our own call and record it for LinkedIn. What's that guy doing now, huh? Marc, thanks for putting yourself in front of our audience.
Thanks for having me.
So this is, being an employment lawyer, here's why I want to talk to you first. This is something that's very near and dear to me. There's a lot of our clients that are business people. Some are large businesses, some are small businesses, and we're going through a very unique and interesting time. And I know that having employees, there are certain measures and protective measures that everybody, I think right now the level of trust in their future people have is compromised, because I think a lot of companies, people don't know what their future looks like. We're certainly doing everything we can at LGFG Fashion House to ensure the continuity of everybody's employment, and we're doing everything in order to protect them and to create that environment of safety. But uncertain times in the employment landscape, there's a couple things we know. You know this, of course, as a lawyer. I know this as an entrepreneur. Businesses, restaurants, bars, a lot of things are going to be closed. People are going to be laid off, and that's concerning for both employees and employers. So as an employee, I mean, you can talk about the context of Ontario or Canada. As an employee, what are the employees' rights right now in terms of protecting their future being employed? Are there any special measures that have been taken by the government to ensure the continuity of their employment through this pandemic?
So right now, in terms of any employee protections, we talk about layoffs, and the interesting thing about that is that generally speaking throughout the country, layoffs are actually considered illegal. They amount to what we call a constructive dismissal, because it's you take away somebody's right to work, you effectively are repudiating the employment contract. We see reference to temporary layoffs in employment standards legislation. Employment, we have the ESA, for example, that talks about layoffs, and it talks about your ability to do so. What sometimes a lot of people miss is that the Employment Standards Act and employment standards legislation in general, all they represent is minimum contractual standards. So while a layoff is on its face illegal, you can sign a contract with an employee that lets the employer lay them off for up to a certain period of time. So from an employee perspective, they definitely want to be looking at their contracts, and if they are laid off, to ascertain if it's even a legal one, and then go over their rights with an employment lawyer. A number of jurisdictions in the country are also passing legislation that protects rights for people who have to, let's say, self-quarantine, go into isolation because they've contracted COVID-19, or if they're caring for a family member, or specifically if the place of employment is shut down or temporarily suspending operations. And then because these are going under leave of absence provisions, especially in Ontario, for example, there's going to be certain recall rights as well once presumably this whole thing blows over.
Okay, so let me ask you something. In a normal people talk, I mean, you're saying a lot of smart words that entrepreneurs like me don't understand. So let's say I'm an employee and I'm working at a bar, and the bar says, "Hey, we're going to have everybody sit home for 3 weeks without pay." As an employee, I don't like that. That obviously creates harm for me and my family. What's my remedy?
So the remedy is, first of all, to contact the employer and see what options are available in terms of if there's any way to continue wages in one way or another. But generally speaking, though, unless the employment contract lets the employer do that 3-week layoff, it would be equivalent to a wrongful dismissal. So it'd be the same thing as if the employer just said, "You're fired." So in that case, the employee could have severance rights. Now, because it's a very temporary layoff like that, and we all sort of have this understanding and tolerance of the reasons behind it, whether that's going to be treated as a fundamental ending of the employment relationship, it's not really clear how the courts are going to do that, precisely because in Ontario, at least, the courts are shut down one way or another.
Okay.
But the first thing is definitely to ascertain if there's any rights to wrongful dismissal damages. But again, you have to look at that in line with this is a very unique circumstance. It's something that happens maybe every couple decades. And the question is, are you going to claim every dollar that's available to you in law, or are you going to be somewhat complicit in understanding of your employer, knowing that it is essential so that there actually is an employer when this whole thing blows over?
Okay, so if this happens, an employee does have rights and they can basically legally challenge and say, hey, you're not allowed to lay me off for 3 weeks without pay.
Theoretically, yes. Practically speaking, there's an old saying, you can't get blood from a stone. And if
Fair enough.
businesses are
Yes.
shutting their doors because there's no money, it can be a very just expensive piece of paper at the end of the day.
So really, realistically speaking, what it should really be is a collaboration between the parties in terms of like employee, employer to kind of work together to work through it, because nobody's going to get anything from anybody because nobody's going to have anything.
Potentially. From a
Yeah.
practical perspective, that would be the best remedy. Even if there is a layoff, though, generally speaking, most employees will meet the threshold for receiving employment insurance benefits. So that will give them at least some degree of compensation. Now, the system's going to get a little bit over flooded. I read something today that something like 2.5% of the workforce is going to be filing a claim for employment insurance, which is that is very extreme recession levels, from what I'm aware.
Okay.
But that is available.
Sorry. Now I know
Yeah.
you're an Ontario bar employment lawyer, obviously, and I'm not, obviously you're not going to comment on like the same rules in different countries. But do you have any knowledge of if that's going to be treated similarly or different in different countries, or not so much?
Most likely, every country will have its own needs in terms of how to deal with the population. They'll have their own economic systems, their own employment standard systems. So, for example, you compare us to, let's say, Scandinavian countries, for example, where you don't have a lot of the same, fallbacks. For example, they have no minimum wage in a lot of these countries because everything's unionized there for the most part. So you're going to see them treating it a different way because the employees there have union protection. Whereas you might go somewhere like the United States, for example, where it's a little more laissez-faire, and you may get economic benefits, but you may not get legislative fallback protection. So it really depends on the country, and even within the country, the jurisdiction.
And by the way, let's take a moment to acknowledge your baby. I think it's kind of cool.
Thank
All of us, like the reality is like, let's just, the tide has receded, and everybody can see we're not wearing any swimsuits here. The reality is we're all working from home, and these are, and I think the authenticity, it's like I said it before too, like, you wear a suit to work every day because you're a Bay Street lawyer effectively, and you go to court and things like that. And I wear a suit every day too. But right now we're all just kind of stripped bare to our basic humanity and just talking. And I actually kind of enjoy that.
There's a certain pleasantness to it.
Yes, and I do want to put on a suit again in the near future. But I think all of our people that are going to be watching this are going through the same. Let me ask you this on the flip side. Okay, so first of all, let's establish that like we have a lot of clients, in our company, they're generally sort of middle, upper to upper management, because we're selling higher and bespoke suits. But they're also wondering, what happens with their company right now. And I guess what you're saying is that at least in Canada, and probably depending on different countries, there's protective measures to sort of remedy, the downside. I guess on the other side, let's say I'm an employer, like I own a business, right? Does it then make sense in the future, as a business owner, when handing out employment contracts, to put in certain contingency measures, to put in certain clauses to sort of account for, let's say force majeure closures like this?
So there's an argument for and against that. The obvious argument for is that in a situation exactly like we're seeing right now, you would have the ability to lay off as many employees as you want, completely guilt-free, completely risk-free. So you definitely have that advantage. The downside to that, and I suppose the other argument, is what message are you sending to the employees, and how motivated are they going to be to take up employment on those terms? Now, while that may be very appropriate for people at a more entry-level role, who are more prone to the cyclical nature of some businesses, upper executives tend to balk, or as far as I'm seeing, they don't tend to be so excited about seeing a temporary layoff clause. And those are going to be the most expensive ones to package out if they decide that a layoff is tantamount to being fired.
I think that's what you said is so incredibly brilliant. And I want to really highlight that because, I think a lot of times when I speak to a lawyer, I kind of expect the legal answer. And what you just gave was a strategic answer, which is brilliant because, one of the things for me as running a company, there's a lot of times where like, on the financial accounting side and it's like legal side, somebody comes to me like, we should do this. And I go, no, like why kill somebody's spirit, And that's a pretty entrepreneurial approach, Mark. I think that's pretty cool that you said that because that's the reality that people that run businesses deal with every day.
Yeah, there's generally with these employment laws, there's a practical answer to whatever the solution is. We have we have a saying, which is you can have an issue that gets rendered down to a law school exam. So when you pose a question to a bunch of law students in a classroom, it doesn't matter what the practical ramifications are. You just answer strictly based on the letter of the law. When you're in the real world and you're dealing with business and you're dealing with dollars and cents and people's livelihood, that theoretical law school answer, it can either only apply to a very partial extent or not even at all sometimes.
You're dealing with people.
Exactly.
You're dealing with people. That makes, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Can I ask you, I was going to talk about some other implications. I just want to skip to this one here. Like, do you see this situation, like what we're going through, affecting the future landscape of employee-employer relationships? Let me qualify that. The relationship between employee and employer is the first and fundamental relationship in a business. And now a lot of people are going to listen and go, no, it's between you and the customer, and that's not true. I'm not in front of my customers all the time. The people in our company are. And what the people in my company transliterate to the customers is our relationship with each other internally. So the fundamental relationship to a business, as Richard Branson says, it's how you treat your employees. And so I think there's certainly leadership opportunities in crisis, but there's also a lot of unknown questions and possibly undermining of trust in general between employees and employers after a crisis like this. How can both sides be prepared in the future, and how do you think this is going to affect maybe the legal landscape, or even in, as you said, the practical landscape between employers and employees?
So in terms of the legal landscape, what we're already seeing right now is, and again, this is particularly in Ontario, we have, for example, now we have infectious disease legislation in the from an employment perspective. So there have always been leaves of absence pertaining to illness and critical care, things along those lines. But now we have this new legislation which is somewhat forecasting for this ever happening again in the future. In terms of where we see the relationship between employees and employers, I have sort of a Darwinian take on things, which is in this situation, employers and their employees are all going to be in fairly tough times. I think we're going to see people stretched thin and in dire straits. And the only way to come on top of this is through, I would suggest, mutual cooperation. You kind of have it's almost a prisoner's dilemma from the perspective of, let's say, an employee. They can either cooperate with their employer and they can both be a little bit put out, or they can go after their employer, bankrupt the company, and then maybe they'll get some money out of it, or maybe everyone will be horrible or poor off at the end of the day. Because this is a situation where I think you really need that mutual degree of cooperation. What's going to happen is, when we're going to come out on top of this, I think employers are going to have to start auditing those employees who were loyal and dedicated to the company and went the extra mile and put the company first. And similarly, I think you're going to have employees who are going to sit back and say, did my company really do all they could to help me out and protect me and allow me to keep putting food on the table? And there's, as I said, there's that Darwinian approach. It may result in some employees with no jobs and some employers with no employees.
Well, what I think you said is really good, is you covered the first thing, is that at least in Canada, the government is stepping up and the legal community is stepping up to legislation to mitigate these kind of circumstances in the future. I mean, it's like you don't know what you don't know until you know it, and that's good on the legal, on the legal community. I think that's pretty cool to act so swiftly, especially since we're still in the midst of it. And then the second thing you said, I think is just very practical. Guys like me that that have people that are working with our organization, I think, like, what you said makes sense. I mean, it actually carries a significant potential to increase the trust between the different parties, because everybody sees that the other side is giving up a little bit of what they could have in the short run in order to benefit everybody in the long run.
I would agree with that, and especially your premise about employees being one of the most important components, or I guess the most important ones of the business relationship. And we see that all the time, because you're putting, you've got to trust these outside individuals to act in the company's best interests and essentially put money in your pocket at the end of the day. So definitely that mutual relationship. If there isn't that symbiosis there, situations like this, it's just there'll be that mutual self-destruction at the end of the day.
Well, and it makes sense, because if I'm going to bring this call to the end and we close the loop here, when I asked at the beginning, what should an employee do if something happens that's sort of outside of their preparedness, you said the first thing they should do is call their employer and talk to them.
Yes, absolutely.
And
yeah, again, as I said, you can't get blood from a stone, and being quick to jump to litigation it's you know, it's going to leave everyone worse off at the end of the day. Sometimes that may be the appropriate remedy. There are, for example, we will see companies who will just, there's that old saying, you cut off the nose to spite the face. So people who just wholesale will shut down the business, even though it may not be necessary. There may be other avenues available to deal with the situation. And in a scenario like that, I wouldn't be surprised if you see the floodgates opening a little bit, but where there's that opportunity for employers and employees to work together on how they're going to weather the storm, I think that's going to be good for everyone at the end of the day.
And I think the premise underlying all that is that most employees are good people. They want to do the right thing, and they have empathy and they have understanding. And most employers are good people, and they want to do, and so everybody's goals are the same. Everybody wants the same thing. So there you go, guys. I thought it's really cool. I think a lot of our clients are really enjoy your feedback, Mark, and it gives a little bit of hope and clarity. There are obviously legal remedies to protect everybody, but I think at the end of the day, what you just said is that really where we need to operate is at the human level.
To a
And
certain extent, yes, absolutely. Yeah.
As much as we can, and that's pretty cool. And again, even just having you on this call, having a partner of a Bay Street law firm, downtown Toronto. I mean, we're talking big brick stuff here. And just at home with the baby monitor going off in our sweaters and our sweatpants. Let's just be honest here. And
neither confirm nor deny.
Neither confirm or deny is a good legal answer. But the point is that at the end of the day, like, we're all just people, and we're all trying to do what's best for our families, for the community, for the continuity of both, the continuity of the system as we've become accustomed to it, which is, given us opportunities to rise above. And I appreciate you taking the time from home to do this. So to everybody, if you guys need to talk to Marc, I'll share his contact info. Marc Kitay, partner at Whitten and Lublin, like the city in Poland.
There you go.
Marc told me that. And I'll connect you guys. He's a straight up awesome dude.